From not paying his staff to using the hotel as a kennel for his dog, this is the most frugal owner I've ever seen on Hotel Hell. Ramsey really had his work cut out with this one.
You cannot run an inn from behind a stove.
There have been owners who have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and then there are those who couldn't care less about the hotel. But what do you do when the owner is so cheap that he'll cut corners on anything to save some cash? That's Sandy McDougall for you, who thought that running a hotel business would be as easy as just putting it up. I mean, can we really blame him? This man was a construction worker before this. Anyway, Chef Ramsay got to meet Sandy in person in the second season of Hotel Hell when he made a quick visit to the Four Seasons Inn. This place was a very dog-friendly inn that had more staff members occupying the rooms than the guests themselves. Could you believe that? Situated in West Dover, Vermont, this place is just north of the Massachusetts state line and close to the Green Mountain National Forest. It's also close to the Deerfield River's North Fork, meaning the location of the inn couldn't sound or look more beautiful than this, which is exactly what bothers me the most. Since they had desperately reached out for Chef Ramsay's help, what could have gone wrong at the hotel? Well, let's just say it was a lot more than just wrong. This hotel was deplorable. Sandy, who as we mentioned worked in a completely different industry before this, bought the 18-bedroom inn with a kennel right next to it. This was his lifelong dream, and he was finally living it. If you ask me, Sandy doesn't come across as a mean guy in any way. All he really wanted to do was own a place that gave people such a great experience that they'd keep coming back for more. But sadly for him, that never happened. And when you're running a business and guests don't show up, that's bad news. However, why didn't the business pick up? Sandy desperately tried to look for an answer. In the end, he only found himself muddled up with more questions and problems. Now, you might think that the name of the hotel is quite familiar. That's only because Four Seasons is a very popular high-end chain of hotels across the world. And you'd only expect nothing but the utmost luxury when you walk in. Chef Ramsay was under the same impression as well. Little did he know that things wouldn't go as expected. Because, well, this Four Seasons was the absolute opposite of the ones he'd stayed at. However, Sandy believed that the inn was stunning. How is it stunning, you might ask? You're about to find out right now, and no, I'm not making any of this up. From dog hair found in the food to dogs roaming around in the kitchen, Four Seasons was so unhygienic that I also spotted a couple of garbage bins overflowing. Now, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. But how much did this affect the business? Well, for someone who had started on a good note, Sandy had hit rock bottom. In just 2 years of opening, his little slice of heaven had turned into a piece of hell. So he desperately needed help to get back on track or he'd lose everything. At this point, the hotel was just hemorrhaging money and it showed no signs of stopping anytime soon. The rooms were always empty and the kennels were practically unused. This really made me wonder, if the place was so beautiful, what was Sandy doing wrong? Sandy was cutting corners, but it's how he did it that worries me the most. Since there was no money actually coming in, the inn ran with a bare minimum staff who had to work around the clock to make up for the lack of employees. But here's the catch. The staff were allowed to live at the hotel instead of earning a real salary. Could you imagine that? That's a damn joke. But Sandy saw no other way to make things work. Considering how he already spent around $1 million on the hotel, something had to be done so he didn't lose everything he had. In an interview, Sandy shared that Richard was his marketing manager, so technically the blame was on him.
I should be beating the hell out of him every day, because he sucks.
However, what Sandy didn't realize was that no matter how much you market the place, everything comes down to how you run it. People aren't just gonna walk in, so hopefully Chef Ramsay's visit would be the wake-up call that he needed. Things really had to change soon since the staff were fed up with the increasing workload and the lack of payments. Take the housekeeper Erin Robinson as an example. Erin had never been paid in full for the work that she did. Things had gotten so bad that she didn't even consider herself an employee anymore, but she was only here to do this.
I don't get paid, so it's not really a job, it's more volunteering. I wouldn't really call it a job.
I could really feel Erin's pain right now. But she isn't the only one who had issues with the management. Bill Brennan, the cook, shared that he was working for free as well. And at the time of filming, he maxed out on 3 credit cards and only had $14 to his name. A financial crunch like that despite having a job is pathetic. This brings up a very important question. Why did the staff choose to stay? Why did they have to put their lives on the line for a job that didn't even value their time and effort? That's because Sandy apparently cared about them. If you would just run through the comments, viewers would soon notice that Sandy was actually a great guy who unexpectedly ran into some trouble. He never meant to put his staff through this ordeal, but simply couldn't help it because he himself was in a pinch as well. Yup, Sandy's worst enemy was himself. The staff believed that he was a nice guy who would keep on his word, but as the days went by, he never ended up paying them. And the staff, understandably, were really beginning to reconsider their decision to stay. Of all the people at the inn, the only person who was extremely happy was Sandy's best friend, being his dog, Layla. According to Layla, the entire hotel was her kennel. There wasn't one place where Layla was restricted from entering, and she could be found just about anywhere at the hotel. Considering the hotel was pet-friendly, it's nice to have a few furballs moving around. But thanks to the low-key maintenance, it wasn't just Layla, but her hair was found just about everywhere. And this is what that led to.
The guests complain about dog hair everywhere, and it makes them feel disgusting.
Well, obviously, who would like that? However, this issue wasn't limited to the dining area alone. From the beds to the chairs, practically everything in the hotel had a trace of Layla. Worst of all, the food wasn't being returned for being undercooked or bland, but instead due to this.
A what?
The dog hair.
A dog hair? Impossible.
Yikes, well, I don't have to tell you how unhygienic and repulsive that is. But here comes the bigger problem. Nobody knew how to break it to Sandy. There were grave issues at this hotel, but Sandy thought he could just get away with using a popular name. Fast forward to when Chef Ramsay arrived at the hotel, he was greeted by a rather unpleasant sight.
Oh, well, it certainly doesn't look like a full season to me. Oof.
Oh no, not the kind of welcome Chef Ramsay was looking for, right? I think the last thing he was expecting to see was a messy dog bed at the entrance. And what's more, there wasn't a single soul to be seen to take his bags or even just to greet him. Finally, Sandy walked up to Chef Ramsay in the goofiest outfit ever.
How are you, Jordan?
Well, I don't know about you, but I'd expect the owner to be dressed a little better. Anyway, Sandy then showed Chef Ramsay to his room, and once there, the famous chef was left speechless. And honestly, who could blame him? Just take a look at how messed up this room truly was.
What a mess. Nice to see the bed's been made.
Was this really supposed to be the multi-Michelin star chef's room? Just how irresponsible are you, Sandy? I think this was a first for Ramsay. These guys couldn't even keep a single room ready for him? That's honestly really sad. As for Sandy, he was completely embarrassed, and you can see that he had no idea Chef Ramsay's room wasn't ready yet. He immediately stormed off to the kitchen to question Erin for not doing her job correctly. But you know what? Maybe if he paid them on time, they would. Chef Ramsay in the meantime was horrified with the condition of the hotel. He did have a quick little chat with Erin and found something that left him completely flabbergasted.
I don't get one.
What do you mean don't get one?
I've never gotten a paycheck.
You're joking.
How does that even work? I mean, that's totally insane. But you know what? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Chef Ramsay didn't know he was in for a lot more as he headed towards the dining room. The man truly hoped for a better lunch service. Meanwhile, Sandy was confident that they would knock his socks off with the food. But would they actually be able to knock his socks off? Or his head? Well, things get even crazier from here. Gwen, the server, first walked in with some bread just to get things started. But instead of helping Chef Ramsay satisfy his appetite, it did just the opposite.
Disgusting. It's just so heavy and doughy.
Ramsay found it to be so inedible that he actually fed it to Layla, who was sitting by his table. I honestly hope she'll be okay. Chef Ramsay had his doubts as well when Layla laid down right beside him. Did he just off her by feeding her this horrendous bread? He actually checked her pulse just to be sure. I think you get my point, that's how bad the bread was. If the bread was worthy of being dog food, the mushroom ravioli looked like dog vomit. The next dish was just as bad, but Chef Ramsay was upset that Sandy hadn't checked on him even once during the tasting. What kind of innkeeper ignores his guests like that? Speaks a lot about Sandy's priorities, huh? The famous chef then stormed into the kitchen and met Steve, one of the chefs, who sadly had no real place in the kitchen.
I'm not exactly sure where I fit in. It's not my menu. I'm not doing any ordering.
Right now, I feel so bad for Steve. This poor man was struggling to come up with words to describe his situation. He couldn't take orders and was barred from curating a menu. So, what was his place here? Damn, did Sandy come across like a control freak to you earlier? 'Cause he didn't to me. However, he does look like one now. As the boss, Sandy wasn't only holding back their paychecks, but also controlling their jobs. How low could his standards even be? My heart goes out to the staff here who were so emotionally overwhelmed. Just look at this man break down and tell me it doesn't tug on your heartstrings.
How am I gonna go home and face my kids when they're all proud of me and I'm like, these dogs are food?
I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Steve, but Chef Ramsay was here to save the day. That's if Sandy would allow him to, so let's hope that he does, otherwise he's screwed. After his awful experience thus far, the famous chef turned his attention to the man in question, Sandy. After describing the place as a madhouse, Ramsay tried to knock some sense into Sandy by saying this.
It starts with you, Sandy. Everybody's blaming the management.
Who is the management really? Aaron, the cook Steve, or Richard, the marketing guy? Well, honestly, none of them. It was Sandy and him alone. Now, it was high time that he understood that, don't you think? This place had the potential to be a slice of heaven like Sandy wanted it to be, but he needed to step up. He needed to pay his staff, clean things up, and actually use the kennel. While the rest of the hotel was nasty, the kennel was actually spotless.
But it all looks unused.
They are.
Jeez.
If it wasn't put to use, then this was an absolute waste of space. Hopefully, Chef Ramsay would be able to turn this place around. Meanwhile, word of Ramsay's arrival drew in large crowds for the service. While Sandy was busy burying his head in the kitchen, the servers were seen checking on the customers. Whose job do you think this was actually? Well, the receptionist, of course. But the hotel didn't have one, remember? The server charged the guest whatever number came to his mind for a room because he simply didn't know the pricing. Chef Ramsay was shocked.
That's already told me 275, so.
How come nobody knows? We need a level of consistency across the board.
But whose fault was this? Honestly, it's as clear as daylight that Sandy had put his staff in a pinch. To top it all off, customers started to rain down like a storm. Someone found garbage under the bed, another wasn't given any towels, and there was also this broken light bulb on the floor. This could have ended fatally wrong if the guest dog had found it before them. It looks like Sandy was about to have his first reality check. The feedback should have been enough to realize that things weren't going as smoothly as he imagined. Chef Ramsay then gathered Sandy and all the employees for a quick little chat, and that's when things started to get really intense. Ramsay realized that none of the employees were paid their wages, and after knowing this is what he had to say.
If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. If you pay nothing, you get bull.
All eyes were now on Sandy, who couldn't stop making excuses. Remember how he blamed Richard, the marketing guy, for the downfall of the hotel? It was time for that same man to speak up, and boy did he make sure he was heard.
Stop it. It's an embarrassment. Stop the lie.
The very next day, Chef Ramsay decided to take a dip in the pool to cool his head off, but this is how it turned out to be.
A present from Layla, a floating turd. Oh my god.
No pool for me, thank you. I'm sure the stream running along the property would be a much better option than this. Chef Ramsay had to bring Sandy out from his deluded world, so he woke him up to his worst nightmare, a room full of unhappy guests. Doesn't it look like he was about to pass out? This man was terrified. After a range of complaints, Sandy was really embarrassed and you could see it in his face. The famous chef then pulled his magic dirt detector out and the results left everyone in shock.
Right there. Oh yeah, big one.
Yikes, that's one of the worst things you could see as an owner. And that's the pillow that Chef Ramsay slept on. Could you imagine that? It was honestly heartbreaking to see that none of the guests wanted to return again, and I know I would feel the same way too. Sandy was so upset to see what his dream hotel had come to. Even though he did have his faults, it was a shame to see him feel like his passion wasn't worth anything. Sandy just needed to improve himself and lead his team in the right direction. And Ramsay did an amazing job not only restoring the inn, but Sandy as well. I mean, just take a look at this man now. Doesn't he look the part? Chef Ramsay then decided to change the name of the property to something that was more fitting. And he dedicated it to the star of the hotel, Layla. What you're looking at now is the upgraded version of Layla's Riverside Lodge. Doesn't it look cozy, warm, and appealing? I know I would book a room for myself now. The rooms were scrubbed from top to bottom and new dog beds were put in. The restaurant also switched to local fresh produce, which I have to tell you made a world of a difference. After the renovations, Chef Ramsay even brought in a special guest. Meet Rumples, Ramsay's own dog, and it looks like Layla's Riverside Lodge had his approval too. After Chef Ramsay left, Sandy decided to continue operations under the same name. I mean, it was way too cute to give up, right? Going by the comments from viewers, Sandy had not only kept his word and Chef Ramsay's modifications, but had further improved on them. Apparently, the honeymoon suite cost about $380 per night as of 2022 and was the most expensive room. It had a huge patio and a jacuzzi bathtub. What's more, it had a gorgeous riverside view which couldn't get any better. The hotel is still open and accepting guests with a good 4.5-star rating on TripAdvisor. However, I did come across a comment where someone said that Sandy put up the hotel for sale after suffering a heart attack. I can't promise that this is true, but I really hope he's okay. Viewers pitched in with a ton of love for Sandy, and I think this man deserves all the love in the world. And let's not forget about the staff. Sandy would have never made it without their undying support. None of them left his side and stuck with him through all the challenges they faced despite not being paid. Going from being one of the cheapest owners to being one of the most wholesome episodes on Kitchen Nightmares, Sandy proved to the world that Chef Ramsay's efforts are definitely worth it. But who knows, there may be more deluded owners who make Chef Ramsay look like a fool in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if that day comes soon.